Hey, I'm Kamala. Welcome to the channel. On this channel, I show you how to use points and miles to lower the cost of travel so your trips feel financially easy. In today's video, I want to bring you along and show you how we planned a majority of our Hawaii trip using points and miles. Hawaii can be a pricey spot depending on where in the US you're flying from and which islands you're staying at. By using points and miles, we were able to lower the total cost of our trip significantly. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 3 main points: the flights and places we booked, why I chose the points programs that I did, and then finally I'll break down what this trip would have cost without points versus how much it costs us with using points. All right, let's get into it. I want to share some quick context before we get into the details. So the trip was 11 nights in total. We spent 5 nights in Maui and then 6 nights in Kauai. I took this trip with my husband, so all the points and costs that I'll be sharing is for 2 people. And we booked this trip in early November, which is shoulder season in Hawaii. Typically, flights and accommodations have been the most expensive part of our trips. So I've just noticed that if we can get those costs down, we can make a lot of trips work within our budget that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And I hope this video helps you see what's possible. So let's start with flight. I booked our flights using Southwest Airlines, and I picked them for multiple reasons. At the time we booked the flights, Southwest didn't have any baggage fees, which was a good perk, and then also they make it really easy to change or cancel flights, which I really appreciate without incurring any penalties. But the main and big reason we chose them is because of the companion pass. We try and get the companion pass every year. And if you're not familiar with what it is, it's essentially a buy one, get one free pass. If I buy a flight, my husband can fly free with me. So essentially I'm getting 2 flights for the price of 1. So whenever I'm searching flights in Southwest, I just open up the website and this is like the main page that pops up. And then you can essentially, I usually do one way because with points, it's just easier to book one way each way versus a round trip in case you do need to cancel or change your dates. So in here, I'll just do Denver to OGG, which is Maui. And then you can either pick a specific date or you can search using the low fare calendar. I'm just going to do that just to show you what that looks like. So if you click this and just search flights, you can see like some dates are a little bit more than others, typically the weekends. Since September is so far out and they've only released until September, November isn't available yet, so I can't show you all the flights that we looked up in November when we went. But you would essentially just come here and then you can just pick a date if you're not tied to a specific date. So you will pick the date here and then you can hit continue to flight time and then you can just pick whichever tier you want to pick and then whatever times work for you. The one crappy thing was since we booked Southwest, there was a layover. There weren't any direct flights to Maui. I believe only United flew directly to Maui from Denver, but just something to keep in mind. And then you can do the same. You can just modify. And then we flew back from Kauai. And again, you can just pick a random date just to see. So right now, again, all the basics are around 25,000 points, which is pretty good deal. And then it also tells you how much fees you would pay on this. So yeah, this is how I researched our flights for Hawaii. I typically prefer to stay in Airbnbs when we're staying in more naturey spots just because it allows us to be closer to say a beach or a forest or a national park if we're exploring one. Whereas I prefer hotels if we're staying in a city since they tend to be more central or if we're trying to get a resort experience. For this trip we did both. In Maui we stayed in Airbnb. It was a condo right on the beach and we could literally walk out to it. So it was well worth it to get the Airbnb there. The cost for the Airbnb was $1,505, but we were able to reduce the cost significantly by using our Capital One points. We had 90,000 Capital One points, which equated out to be $900. I know it's not the best redemption value, but I don't really care. It helped us offset the cost of this Airbnb and made the trip possible for us, which otherwise might not have been possible to have a Hawaii trip for this long. We also stayed at an Airbnb for 2 nights in Kauai. The cost for this Airbnb was $869. It was a bit pricey, but we didn't mind the splurge since it was in a great location. For the hotel that we booked, we used Hyatt points. Hyatt is actually one of my go-to programs because in cash, some of their hotels can be a bit pricey, but typically they're fairly reasonable if you use points, especially if you book 6 months to a year out. All right, so when I'm looking at hotels under the Hyatt website, this is how I approach it. So essentially, we were looking at hotels in Kuwait. So you can just put the city in here, and then we were looking for 4 nights. November is available here, so I'm just gonna pick random 4 nights, and then we can play with it, and then just have this use point selected, and then I will do 2 adults, 1 room, and then you can just find hotels. This Grand Hyatt Kauai came up, which is where we stayed, and it just shows you pictures of the property. It was gorgeous. So glad we got to experience this resort, and right now it's not showing any just points, so it's showing a points plus cash. So we can like tweak the date to see if we can find anything. Seeing something in October, of course, before we book any of our flights. It was just good to research everything. So your hotels, Airbnbs, everything before anything's booked. You can see where the availabilities are, especially for points. So now you can see that in October for 4 nights, this standard suite is available for 56,000 points. You can either pay this many points or this many and then pay some cash, which is still significantly cheaper than if you just booked with cash. So if we look at just the cash rate, you can see that the hotel is about averaging between $800 and $900 per night. So if you can get 4 nights for $800 and 100,000 points, it's not too bad. Again, you can play with the dates and see when the sweet spot is for points, because when we went, we got those rooms. I know I covered a lot, so I just wanted to quickly summarize and show what this trip would have cost without points. So under this redemption cash price column, you can see the dollar amounts we would have paid if we didn't use any points. So you can see that we would have paid $600 for our flight to Maui, $120 from our flight from Maui to Kauai, and then $800 for our flight from Kauai to Denver. And then for our stay at the Grand Hyatt Kauai, we would have paid $3,296. For the Airbnb in Maui, we would have paid $1,505, and then for the Airbnb in Kauai, we would have paid $869.07. Now under the cash paid column is what we actually paid. So for our flights, we only paid $1,160 for 2 people, which is the taxes, and then this is the amount of points that we use for the flights. For our stay at Grand Hyatt, why we didn't pay anything. We covered this whole $3,296 price with our 140,000 points that we transferred over from Chase. And then for our Airbnb in Maui, we paid $605. We reduced our cost by over half by using 90,000 Capital One points, which were equivalent to $900. And then lastly, for the Airbnb in Kauai, we didn't use any points, so we paid $869. So without using any points, we would have paid a total of $7,190. But since we used points, we only paid $1,508.87. So essentially, we reduced our total cost of our trip by 79%, which was a huge savings, and we really wouldn't have taken this trip if we didn't have these points to utilize. Thanks for watching. I hope this video was helpful. I hope you're able to see that you don't only have to use points to book luxury trips. You can use points to make trips like this possible without having to blow your whole budget up. If you would like to see more videos like this with real life trip breakdowns, please make sure you're subscribed. Thank you.